Dearest listeners, what is more intoxicating than watching a man of profound melancholy discover that the cure for his darkness has been hiding in plain sight, dismissed by all as utterly insignificant? Today, your devoted chronicler brings you the most extraordinary tale of Lord Sebastian Blackwood, Marquess of Ravenshollow, who believed his heart died with his wife, only to discover it had merely been sleeping, waiting for a bookish cousin everyone forgot existed. But let us not rush. For the best scandals, like the finest wine, must be savored properly. Before we raise the curtain on our first act, a small arrangement is necessary between us, my dear confidants, to ensure that no future chronicle of the Tun's best-kept secrets is lost in the post. I must ask you to subscribe to this channel. Do ring the little bell, as one would summon the butler, to ensure you never miss a dispatch. And of course, a small nod of approval, your like, informs me that you appreciate these indiscretions. Now do tell me in the comments, what is the essential ingredient for an unforgettable romance? One must begin, gentle listeners, with the splendid misery that was Lord Sebastian Blackwood in the spring of 1818. At 28, the Marquess of Ravenshollow cut a figure both magnificent and tragic through London society. Dressed perpetually in black, not merely for mourning, though 2 years had passed since his wife's death, he moved through ballrooms like a beautiful spectre, present but never truly there. The Tun whispered about him incessantly, as they are wont to do. Some claimed he had loved his late wife desperately, though those of us with keener observation knew better. Lady Blackwood had been a marriage of convenience, pleasant enough but lacking that spark that transforms mere mortals into poets. No, what haunted our dear Marquess was not lost love, but the weight of having never found it at all. And then there was the Thornwood household. Oh, what a delicious study in contrasts. Sir Reginald Thornwood, that pompous merchant who had bought his way into respectability, possessed everything except refinement. His wife, Lady Thornwood, compensated for her husband's rough edges by being twice as pretentious as necessary. They had produced one genuinely beautiful daughter, Lady Cordelia, whose golden hair and sapphire eyes had already earned her the title of the season's incomparable. But there was another young lady in that household, gentle listeners, though one could hardly blame you for not noticing her. Lady Isabel Thornwood existed in that peculiar purgatory, reserved for poor relations. Neither servant nor family, she occupied the shadows of the Thornwood residence, a ghost at the feast of life. Her parents had died when she was 7, leaving her to the tender mercies of her uncle's charity, and what cold charity it was. While Cordelia swept through rooms in gowns of silk and satin, Isabel made do with altered cast-offs in browns and grays. Where Cordelia's golden tresses were styled by a French maid, Isabel's remarkable auburn hair, yes, dearest listeners, remarkable, though none bothered to look, was pulled back in the severest style manageable without assistance. Her eyes, a striking green that could rival any emerald, were hidden behind the downcast lashes of one who had learned that invisibility was safer than notice. The cruel irony was that Isabel possessed something far more valuable than beauty. She had a mind. While Cordelia could barely concentrate through a country dance, Isabel could read Latin, Greek, and French. While her cousin practiced pretty accomplishments meant to snare a husband, Isabel lost herself in philosophy, poetry, and the natural sciences. The Thornwood Library, that magnificent room that Sir Reginald had purchased along with the house but never entered, became Isabel's sanctuary. 3 stories of books reaching toward a painted ceiling, with hidden alcoves and sliding ladders, it was paradise for a girl who found more companionship in pages than in people. Lady Thornwood considered this arrangement perfect. Isabel could catalog and maintain the collection, adding value to the estate while remaining conveniently out of sight. The Thornwood Ball of April 1818 was meant to be Cordelia's triumph. Sir Reginald had spent a fortune transforming his London mansion into a fairyland of hothouse flowers and crystal chandeliers. The The cream of society attended, partly from curiosity about the merchant's daughter who dared aim so high, partly because the season had been dreadfully dull and any entertainment would suffice. Lord Sebastian attended under duress, practically dragged there by his friend, the Duke of Ashford. The Marquess stood in the ballroom's entrance, surveying the glittering crowd with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to find everything wanting. Within moments, the matchmaking mamas descended like elegantly dressed vultures, each pushing forward their daughters with increasingly desperate enthusiasm. Lady Cordelia naturally was among the offerings, approaching with practiced grace in blue silk that matched her eyes, diamonds at her throat, catching the light with every calculated movement. She performed perfectly, the curtsy, the smile, the carefully selected topics of conversation. The Marquess responded with such minimal courtesy that even Cordelia, not known for her perception, realized she was being dismissed. But here, gentle listeners, is where our tale truly begins. For while this painful social dance occurred in the ballroom, something far more interesting was happening on the moonlit terrace beyond the French doors. Isabel had escaped after being dismissed by Lady Thornwood, who deemed her services no longer required after Cordelia's fifth dance. She had smuggled a small volume in her reticule, Ovid's Metamorphoses in the original Latin, and had found a bench in the shadows where the light from the ballroom just allowed her to read. She was deep in the tale of Pygmalion when the Marquess burst through the doors, fleeing the persistent Lady Pemberton and her twin daughters. The sudden intrusion startled Isabel so thoroughly that she leaped to her feet, the book flying from her hands, its pages scattering in the evening breeze like white butterflies. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the haunted Marquess and the forgotten cousin, both caught in their respective flights from the ballroom's suffocating expectations. Then, without a word, they both dropped to their knees, scrambling to catch the escaping pages. Their hands touched, reaching for the same sheet, and both pulled back as if burned. But Sebastian had glimpsed the text, and something extraordinary happened to his face. It transformed from marble perfection to something alive and wondering. He murmured the Latin words he had seen, continuing the very line she had been reading from memory, his voice carrying the weight of understanding, of recognition. Isabel's shock was absolute. Here was someone who not only recognized Ovid, but quoted him perfectly, understanding the deeper meanings within the text. She forgot to be invisible, forgot to be proper, forgot everything except the miracle of finding another soul who knew these words. They reassembled her book together under the moon's patient light, and as they worked, they talked about transformation, about metamorphosis as metaphor, about the nature of change and grief and beauty. She challenged his dark interpretation of Ovid's tales. He marveled at her optimistic reading of the tragedies. Neither noticed how long they knelt there on the cold stones, surrounded by scattered pages, speaking as if they had known each other for lifetimes rather than minutes. The spell shattered when Lady Cordelia appeared, seeking the terrace's cool air. Her shock at finding her invisible cousin monopolizing the very gentleman who had rejected her advances was absolute. The transformation was immediate. Isabel shrank back into her apologetic persona while Sebastian's face closed like a door being firmly shut. Yet as Cordelia dragged him back toward the ballroom, chattering about proper introductions and her father's eagerness to make his acquaintance, the Marquess turned back. His eyes found Isabel across the distance, and in that glance was a promise, a question, and something that looked remarkably like hope. What followed, dearest listeners, was the most delicious comedy of errors, though neither participant found it particularly amusing at the time. Lord Sebastian Blackwood, who had successfully avoided every notable house in London for 2 solid years, suddenly developed a passionate interest in viewing private libraries. By pure coincidence, though we all know better, his first stop was the Thornwood residence. The entire household was thrown into chaos by his arrival. Sir Reginald nearly fainted from delight. Lady Thornwood changed the tea service 3 times, and Cordelia was hastily summoned from her morning toilette. Isabel, naturally, was sent to the library to ensure everything was properly dusted, a task that conveniently removed her from sight. The torture of the drawing-room visit was exquisite. Sir Reginald's endless discourse on trade difficulties, Cordelia's vacant observations about the weather, Lady Thornwood's calculating gaze as she mentally planned the wedding. After precisely 30 minutes, Sebastian requested to see the famous library he had heard so much about. When they entered that magnificent room, there was Isabel, perched on the rolling ladder, reaching for a volume on a high shelf. Her ugly brown dress was covered by a practical apron, dust smudged across her nose, and her hair escaping its severe pins in auburn tendrils that caught the morning light. She nearly fell from the ladder in shock, providing Sebastian the excuse to rush forward, steadying her descent with hands that lingered perhaps longer than strictly necessary. The way he looked at her, gentle listeners, as if she were a manuscript in a language only he could read. Lady Thornwood quickly maneuvered to have Cordelia show the Marquess the collection, but Sebastian insisted on having someone who actually knew the books. What could Lady Thornwood say without admitting her daughter's ignorance? So Isabel became the guide, with Cordelia as an increasingly frustrated chaperone. What followed was pure artistry. Sebastian began leaving notes hidden in the books he examined, quotes, questions, recommendations for further reading. Isabel responded in kind, and they developed an entire correspondence right under the Thornwoods' noses. While Cordelia prattled on about fashion, Sebastian and Isabel conducted entire conversations through carefully placed volumes and significant glances. He would pull out Byron, finger a passage about isolation, and she would respond by shelving Dawn near his elbow, open to verses about connection. He would quote Keats on beauty, and she would counter with Wordsworth on the beauty of the ordinary. It was a dance more intimate than any waltz, a courtship conducted in marginalia and bookmarks. The entire ton began to talk about Lord Sebastian's apparent courtship of the Thornwood girl. Bets were placed at White's, wedding clothes were mentally designed, and Lady Thornwood began practicing her new signature as mother of a marchioness. But those with sharper eyes noticed other things. How the Marquess only truly smiled when a certain brown-dressed figure appeared. How he timed his visits for the morning light in the library, knowing she would be there alone before the family rose. How his hands trembled slightly when taking a book from her fingers. The crisis came when Sebastian arrived one morning to find Isabel weeping over a volume of Keats. Her uncle had just informed her that she would be sent to Yorkshire as a companion to his elderly, notoriously difficult aunt, effectively banishment to social death. Without thinking, without permission, without any regard for propriety, Sebastian took her hand. The moment was electric, both realizing simultaneously what had been building between them through all those weeks of secret communication. She fled the library, leaving him standing among the books, holding the volume still damp with her tears, looking like a man who had just discovered his heart was not dead, but painfully, magnificently alive. The Waverley Garden Party was one of those affairs where the entire ton gathered to pretend enjoyment while conducting the serious business of gossip and matchmaking. Sebastian attended only under threat of physical force from the Duke of Ashford, standing near the refreshments and radiating such forbidding energy that even the most determined mothers steered clear. The public humiliation of Isabel came courtesy of Lord Pemberton, that dreadful gossip, who loudly inquired about the rumor that the Thornwoods were shipping their poor relation off to Yorkshire. Sir Reginald, fool that he was, confirmed it with brutal casualness, explaining that Isabel had no prospects, no dowry, no beauty, no connections, and might as well be useful elsewhere. The cruelty of it, spoken so publicly, sent ripples through the crowd. Some tittered at the poor relation's fate. Others felt genuine sympathy for the girl standing frozen by the rose bushes, her face burning with humiliation. But Sebastian, The transformation in him was terrible and wonderful to behold. Without a word, he strode across the garden, past the shocked Cordelia, past the gaping matrons, straight to where Isabel stood, trembling. He offered his arm and requested she show him Lady Waverley's conservatory, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent garden. The conservatory was a glass paradise, humid and fragrant with jasmine and orange blossoms. Sebastian led her to a bench beneath a flowering vine, and there, surrounded by exotic blooms, something shifted between them. He spoke of what he saw when he looked at her, not the shabby dresses or the servants' tasks, but the brilliant mind, the gentle humor, the way she brought light into rooms without even trying. She tried to protest, to repeat her uncle's cruel words about her worthlessness, but Sebastian wouldn't allow it. He told her how she had awakened something in him he thought dead forever, how their conversations through books had become the only bright spots in his dark existence, how the thought of her exile to Yorkshire felt like losing the sun itself. They were interrupted, of course they were, by Cordelia's arrival with half the garden party in tow, all eager to witness what they assumed would be the Marquess's proposal to the beautiful daughter. The look of triumph on Lady Thornwood's face was premature, for Sebastian barely acknowledged their presence, keeping his attention fixed on Isabel, even as social pressure demanded he escort Cordelia back to the party. But something had fundamentally changed in that conservatory. A connection had been acknowledged, even if neither quite knew what to do with it. The morning after the garden party brought disaster in the form of Mr. Clarence Whitmore, a recently ennobled merchant of 50 years and considerable fortune, who had approached Sir Reginald with an offer for Isabel's hand. Not Cordelia's, Isabel's. One might wonder why such a man would want a penniless relation, but the answer was depressingly simple. Whitmore wanted a wife who would be grateful, who would never question him, who had no family position to make demands. A woman he could control completely. Sir Reginald accepted immediately, seeing an opportunity to rid himself of his burden while gaining a useful business connection. Isabel's consent was neither sought nor considered necessary. She was informed at breakfast that she was now engaged, the wedding to occur in 3 weeks' time. The news spread through London like wildfire, reaching Sebastian as he sat in his study, composing what would have been a letter declaring his intentions. His friend Ashford brought the intelligence, watching in alarm as the Marquess went perfectly still, the color draining from his face. Meanwhile, at the Thornwood residence, a different drama unfolded. Cordelia, in a fit of spite that she would later deeply regret, told Isabel that Lord Sebastian had been asking about the wedding, seemingly pleased that his path to Cordelia was now clear with Isabel removed from the household. It was a lie, of course, but Isabel had no reason to doubt her cousin. The cruelty of it, to discover love only to lose it, to find a kindred spirit only to be sold to the highest bidder, nearly broke her. She spent that night writing a letter she would never send, pouring out her heart to the man she believed had merely been amusing himself with the poor relation while courting the beauty. Sebastian, meanwhile, was conducting his own investigation. His man of business discovered something interesting. Isabel's parents had not died penniless as the Thornwoods claimed. There was an inheritance, a considerable one, held in trust until her 21st birthday, which was merely weeks away. The Thornwoods had been keeping this information from her, planning to maintain control even after she came of age through this rushed marriage to Whitmore. Armed with this knowledge and a determination that surprised even himself, Sebastian prepared for battle. The confrontation came at the Fairfax Ball, the last grand event before Isabel's forced wedding. She attended under duress, dressed in one of Cordelia's cast-off gowns, hastily altered, her aunt wanting to display the family's generosity one last time before shipping her off to Whitmore's estate. Sebastian arrived like an avenging angel, dressed entirely in black, except for a single white rose in his lapel, the exact shade of the moonlight on that first night they met. He moved through the ballroom with purpose, ignoring the attempts at conversation, the mothers throwing their daughters in his path, everything except his single-minded goal. He found Isabel hidden behind a potted palm, how poetically appropriate, trying to remain invisible as Whitmore loudly discussed his plans for his future bride with a group of leering gentlemen. The things that man said, the crude implications about teaching her gratitude, made Sebastian's hands clench into fists. Without preamble, without the polite social maneuvering that usually preceded such things, Sebastian approached Whitmore directly. The conversation that followed was conducted in low tones, but witnesses reported seeing Whitmore's face go from red to white to gray in the span of minutes. Whatever Sebastian said, and rumors ranged from threats of financial ruin to promises of physical violence, Whitmore withdrew his suit immediately, practically fleeing the ballroom. But the true drama was yet to come. Sebastian then approached Sir Reginald, this time making no effort to lower his voice. He announced to the entire ballroom that he had information regarding Isabel's inheritance, that her uncle had been withholding her fortune, and that he had already contacted the proper authorities to investigate this fraud. The scandal was delicious, gentle listeners. Sir Reginald sputtered and protested, but the damage was done. In one brilliant move, Sebastian had freed Isabel from Whitmore, exposed the Thornwoods' deception, and declared his own interest for all to see. Yet when he turned to Isabel, expecting gratitude or at least relief, he found her fleeing the ballroom. He pursued her through the house, finally catching her in. Where else? The library. She turned on him, with tears streaming down her face, accusing him of humiliating her, of turning her into a spectacle for his own amusement. Didn't he understand that she had survived by being invisible? That his grand gesture had made her the center of the scandal she had always feared? Sebastian's response was to pull out a letter, the one he had been writing when news of her engagement arrived. In it, he had formally requested permission to court her, had spoken of finding his soul's match in their literary exchanges, had confessed that she had brought light back into his life when he thought he would live in darkness forever. The letter was dated the day before Whitmore's proposal, proving that his interest preceded any knowledge of her inheritance. He had wanted her when he thought her penniless, wanted her in her brown dresses and her dusty aprons, wanted her for her mind and her spirit, and the way she made him feel alive again. The resolution of our tale, dearest listeners, came with the spring rain that April morning. Isabel had spent a sleepless night reading and rereading Sebastian's letter, while he had paced his study like a caged wolf, wondering if his dramatic revelation had cost him everything. Dawn found Isabel at the Thornwood doorstep with only a small valise, having left a note stating she was claiming her inheritance and would no longer burden their household. She had nowhere to go. The family solicitor wouldn't open for hours, but she couldn't remain another moment under that roof. The rain began as she stood there, uncertain and alone, and then, like something from the novels she so loved, Sebastian's carriage appeared. He had been driving around London all night, unable to rest, and some instinct had brought him to her just when she needed him most. He stepped out into the rain without hesitation, his coat immediately soaked, and found her standing there with her pitiful valise and her chin raised defiantly, despite the tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. Without a word, he held out his hand. Without hesitation, she took it. He brought her to his sister's house, perfectly proper, entirely respectable, where the Duchess of Ashford took one look at the bedraggled pair and immediately understood everything. While Isabel was whisked away for hot tea and dry clothes, Sebastian made his position clear. He would wait as long as necessary, but he intended to marry Isabel Thornwood, inheritance or no inheritance, with or without society's approval. The inheritance, when finally claimed, proved substantial enough to make Isabel independently wealthy. The Thornwoods faced social ruin and legal consequences for their fraud. Cordelia, in a twist no one expected, publicly apologized to her cousin and revealed her own lies about Sebastian's feelings. an act of courage that eventually earned her redemption, and later a loving husband who valued her newfound honesty. But the wedding, gentle listeners, oh, the wedding was perfection itself. It took place in the library where they had conducted their courtship in secret. Every guest received a book of poetry as a favor. Isabel wore not white, but a gown of the softest sage green that made her eyes sparkle like emeralds. Sebastian, for the first time in 2 years, wore dove gray instead of black. When asked later what had changed his mind about love and life, the Marquess was heard to say that he had been like Pygmalion in reverse. Instead of breathing life into stone, a living woman had brought warmth back to his marble heart. And Isabel, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten, proved that sometimes the best love stories are written not with grand gestures, but with quiet moments in libraries, secret notes in books, and the perfect quote at the perfect moment. Their marriage became legendary for its intellectual salon, where discourse and debate were valued over gossip and fashion. They had 3 children, all of whom were taught to read Latin before they could dance a quadrille, and their library grew to be the finest private collection in England. And so, gentle listeners, another tale reaches its blessed conclusion. Love found a way, as it always does when 2 souls recognize each other across a crowded room, or in this case, over scattered pages in moonlight. Remember, dearest ones, that sometimes the most overlooked hearts hold the greatest treasures, and the forgotten ones often have the most interesting stories to tell. Until we meet again, I remain your devoted chronicler of romance and redemption, your faithful servant in all matters of the heart, Lady Ravenswood.